more out of life every day. Picture biting into a whole peeled orange. Not a timid bite, but a huge, wide-mouthed bite. What if you lived your life like that? Living life juicy is what that life might be like. We explore how we can be present and kind as we do great things.
Hey there, welcome to Living Life Juicy. My name is John Losi, and I'm your host and guide for the Living Life Juicy podcast. And it's not just, this is a place, Living Life Juicy is about figuring out how we can be present and kind as we do great things. And you'll notice I've got Living Life Juicy is one channel. We've also got Growing People. Let me see if I can get this right. There it is. Growing People, which is where we kind of put shorter bits that are all about creating resources for people to plug into other things about topics and growing people in building community and learning, all that kind of stuff. And then there's the Into Wisdom group. You can find out more by clicking on the QR code up behind my head here. And yeah, so let me tell you a little bit about what's going on today. I am with Dan Miller. Dan is the founder and creator of Fifth Pillar Consulting. And I got to know Dan in 2018 in an AEE conference in Orlando, where we sat around a fire and solved the world's problems for a few hours. Then the blessing of the pandemic was being able to connect with people like Dan, who lives across the country from me. And that was it's been a great experience the last 2 years, getting to know Dan and learning from him and just connecting with a quality person like that. So Dan, welcome. We're so glad you're here. Can't wait to find out a little bit more about what you're doing. So welcome.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to living life juicy while we grow people into wisdom.
So tell me, I'm not even going to try to explain what you do. I want you to describe what you do. So when people ask, hey, Dan, what do you do? Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I do a lot of things, John. With Fifth Pillar Consulting, I tend to fit into one of three roles as either a consultant, facilitator, or coach. As a consultant, I'm generally here to serve. I have a lot of my background, and we'll probably get into that a little bit, is in outdoor education, working with Outward Bound as a wilderness instructor and staffing person for a number of years. And other roles that I've had have really given me some insight into how to kind of create and maintain a safe and effective wilderness program. And so I do a fair amount of consulting with outdoor education programs, adventure education programs, to just provide an outside perspective on safety and quality and efficacy of programming. As a facilitator and trainer, I tend to kind of go across the map in terms of geography and populations. I'm happy working with at-risk youth, and I'm also happy working with Fortune 500 executives. I find that embedded in experiential education, one of the reasons I like it so much, is no matter what it is that you're trying to train or teach, you are usually also sneaking in some kind of character education to that. Like just a lot of the skills of how to be good in business or how to be good at whatever skill you're trying to get better at tends to come back to just kind of being self-aware and being kind and being compassionate. So as a facilitator and a trainer, I'm kind of on a secret mission to teach those things, as well as whatever leadership skills, communication skills, conflict resolution skills people are looking to build. And I create experiences that help.
That reminds me of a favorite quote from Martin Buber, who said, any education worthy of the name is the education of character.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's really it's at the root of everything that we do at Fifth Pillar.
Yeah.
And the coaching piece, I didn't necessarily come to that on purpose, but like many things in life, I find I keep getting opportunities to serve as a coach for individuals and organizations, and it's really just been in the past year, and I'm loving it. The one-on-one connection, what it really comes down to is like asking artful questions that help, similar to what you do, help lead people to their next best step, whatever they're trying to figure out. Usually it's kind of performance coaching. So how do I get from where I'm at to where I want to be? And all three of those things have just really lit me up over the past few years. Lately, the last thing I'll add to that is, in terms of what I do, is if at all possible, I tend to bring some form of music and fun and entertainment along with me for the ride, whether I'm coaching, consulting, or facilitating.
Okay. I'm curious, and I want to follow up on the music thing in a little bit, so I hope your handpan's handy. But I'm curious because you can't swing a cat without hitting a coach and consultant. So how would you describe your coaching that sets it aside from the other stuff that's out there?
That's a great question. So coaching, I would say if I'm doing coaching that is really coming from me and Fifth Pillar and who I am, I'm probably coaching folks in how to navigate this world of experiential education and outdoor and adventure education. I've been doing a lot of workshops and actually just got signed on for a keynote later this year to talk about longevity in outdoor and experiential education. When I first started, I only identified as an outdoor educator, and that was kind of all that I knew. And it was years before I finally heard the term experiential education and started to understand that what I had been doing for nearly a decade was actually part of a much larger industry. And figuring out how to navigate in that industry and continue to do the things that I love has been quite challenging. And I know a lot of people who did this work for a little while and they were like, that was fun. Now I'm going to go into finance, or,
real life, get a real
now I'm
job.
going to get a real job. So I'd say my biggest passion for helping people in coaching is really helping them navigate that world. And then when I do coaching as part of contract work with other organizations, and then I would say my special sauce kind of depends on what their special sauce is. And in general, I think what makes an excellent coach is just genuine care and compassion for the people that they're working with. I know my first few times at trying coaching, I was pretty concerned with like, oh gosh, these people expect me to know all kinds of things and to share with them some really important knowledge. And my focus was a little bit more on me than it was on them. And as I got sort of used to those particular shoes, I realized that it's just not about me at all. And if I'm very interested in the people that I'm working with and I really care about them, the process tends to work out really well.
I think that's so important for the coaching piece. It's not about you. There's a quote from The Incredibles when Mrs. Incredible is confronting Mr. Incredible and says, hey, it's not about you. And that is a mantra in coaching because I actually find it's more difficult for me to coach people who are in my specialty because I'm trying to fix the stuff that I was encountering. I'm not really listening to where they're at. They're describing a place that I'm familiar with. So I'm trying to fix me in that context. And I had this conversation with a consultant who works with organizations who are trying to up their value for sales. And he was asking me, wait, you don't have any background in finance. How can you coach a financial person? And it's like, well, I'm probably not, if your finance person needs coaching in finance, they probably shouldn't be your finance person. What they need is clarity around other things, and that I can offer. I'm not going to try and fix their financial stuff. They don't need to get smarter. They need to get healthier across the board around the whole person piece. And that's what I can do regardless of the industry. So there's confidence, for you being able to step into any Fortune 500 situation because you're such a good facilitator. I think that's like the foundational skills for coaching are what you learn as a facilitator.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the bottom line is that most often the brain that holds the problem is also the one that holds the solution.
Right. And is also the one that created the problem in the first place.
Yeah, it certainly can be.
Yeah.
So, my job in that role is just to help lead people to their own wisdom. That sometimes those powerful, thoughtful questions are just amazing at sort of breaking open that egg.
Yeah, I love that you're bringing up the idea of the quality of the question, because that is the the foundation for coaching is really the relationship that you talked about, and then being able to be curious and ask real questions.
Yeah. Well, you and I had the conversation, John, when I was just like, somebody's asking me to be a coach. Somebody came to my workshop and they're like, yeah, I want more of that one-on-one. And I was like, I'm not a coach. I don't know if I, and you were the one who was like, Dan, you are a facilitator. And facilitator's job is to sort of draw out the wisdom from the folks that you're working with and creating experiences that help do that. It's the exact same thing. Just do what you're naturally inclined to do and you'll be fine. And you were so right. Like coaching is facilitation, just more often on a one-on-one situation than in a group.
Yeah, oftentimes I'll ask, like, getting in a group of facilitators, first thing I ask is, what do you facilitate? Because, and you've hinted at this before, is we don't facilitate experience. In fact, facilitate means to make easy, and the last thing that we do is make experiences easy. If you're a facilitator of outdoor programming, then you're helping people go glamping because that's making camping easy. But what you're doing is you're creating experiences that facilitate growth, whether that's in a group context or whether that's individual facilitation is facilitating growth for an individual or coaching.
Yeah. Carl Ronke would appreciate that answer. And talking to him, he's like, I don't use that term for what I do anymore. I call myself an instigator.
Yeah.
Which is a pretty fun thing to think about.
Well, it's intentionally provocative. It gets
things up, you know?
Yeah. So tell me this. I'm curious as to your kind of origin story. How did you get here? How did you get to Fifth Pillar? And kind of what path did you take? Because oftentimes people see what you do and go, I wonder, like, did you study that on purpose or what's the deal? So how did you get here?
The short answer is magic is how I got here. The universe just tends to provide exactly, I'll speak for myself, exactly what I need whenever I have needed it in my life. And so that's the short version. The slightly longer version is when I was when I was like graduating high school, I was pretty confident that I just wanted to like live in a cave and hunt buffalo because I was just not into the rat race that everybody seemed to be striving towards. I was more just following the fun. I enjoyed nature. But I thought that a lot of what people around me were just spending all their time and mental energy on was not the best thing for me to spend my time on. And as I got a little bit older, as I went to college and did some traveling, that transformed into maybe I don't want to like live in a cave and isolate myself from the rest of the world, but I want to travel my own path. And in clarifying my values at that time in life, I came to identify freedom as a really important value for me. So I needed a job that would allow for that. And then I also identified just kind of spreading the love and the joy and I didn't use this word at the time, but compassion was also really high up on my list.
Tell me a little bit more about what you mean by freedom.
Yeah, sure.
Is it just another word for nothing left to lose?
Thanks, Janice. For me, it was just I didn't want to give all of myself and my time over to some organization that basically owns me, and I get this like few hours in the evening and 2 days out of every week to just relax and enjoy myself and recover from a hard week of work. I've always kind of gravitated towards extremes in some sense. So eventually when I found a job that's like, hey, come work hard for 30 days, nonstop, 24 hours a day, and then take off for a bit and do whatever you want. And, there'll be another course ready for you whenever you come back. I had heard about Outward Bound when I was in high school and college. I did not have like an outdoor background. I thought I would never be able to make it in that field because I had never touched. I'm from Florida, there's no rocks, there's no mountains, there's no hills. But it was just in there in my mind, like that would be cool to like go on expeditions with people. And after I graduated college, I did a little bit of traveling. I found myself in Australia for about 6 months, just kind of backpacking and finding beautiful natural spaces and picking up odd jobs like working as a carny for a while. Um, I started to develop this belief that if you follow the signs and you pay attention, that it becomes pretty obvious what your next step should be. And that philosophy definitely got me through 6 months in Australia with all kinds of fun stories to tell. But when I came home, I was totally broke. I, had a degree in psychology and I moved in with my dad. And my dad was like, "What are you going to do now?" And I was like, "I don't know, Dad, but I have this belief in the universe that everything's going to be fine and lightning's going to strike and it'll be so obvious." And he's like, "Okay, but what are you going to do?" And, I lived with him for a little while. I worked at the YMCA, chaperoning kids at like dances and after school programs. And they ate me alive, man. At one point, they locked me in the candy closet and wouldn't let me out. And I was like trying to manage their behavior and I had no idea what to do. And that got me thinking, like, man, I would love to figure out how to work with challenging youth because whatever I'm doing right now at the YMCA is not being very effective. And right around that time, when I kind of put that out into the world, I found an internship with Outward Bound working with at risk and adjudicated youth on 30-day paddling trips in Florida. That was the lightning bolt. Got the internship and spent the next almost 15 years of my life working full time with Outward Bound in one form or another. That took me from canoeing with rowdy teenagers in Florida to backpacking, rock climbing, whitewater paddling all over the country and working with a wider variety of populations. Eventually, moved from intern to assist to instructor to lead instructor to course director and eventually staffing coordinator when I settled in North Carolina. That was a pretty cool job, but it was definitely the first one that took me away from the magic of the field and being with students all the time to being in the office, which I found to be significantly less magical.
Yeah, but it's
Yeah,
got to get done. That's yeah. You now are truly, this is another term of facilitation, which is you are making it possible for others to be out in the field. And if that doesn't happen, the magic doesn't happen anywhere.
yeah. Wilderness instructors were my favorite people, and I just wanted to serve them and be of service to that community. But it was harder. I couldn't believe it. I always in my mind was like, I'm not gonna have to be in the woods. I'm just gonna like hang out in front of a computer and make stuff happen. And it turned out to be much harder than a 30-day wilderness trip with a bunch of you know at-risk teenagers.
Yeah, it's amazing how fatiguing it is. It's not like physically, you're sitting in front of the screen, but intellectually, it's that challenge of making the puzzle pieces all fit together so that you have everything meets at the same time in the same place and it makes things happen. That's an intellectual challenge.
Yeah, and I started to realize like the reason why I wanted to live in a cave and hunt buffalo in the first place is because when you work 9 to 5,
Mhm.
5 days a week, and you're exempt, which really means you can work as much as is needed to get the work done, you don't get a break. For like years, you don't really get a break. And that was really hard for me.
Yeah, but it's meaning. That's the thing is you found meaning in it because you saw it as important, and all of a sudden that you're exiting the cave because you saw the importance of getting that task done.
hmm it was a huge experience for me, and I loved that I was able to serve in that fashion for a long time. And that's when I started developing that passion for helping people figure out, like, oh, you're starting out your first day on the job as an outdoor instructor. Like, what is your life going to be like 5 years from now or 10 years from now? That was pretty tough, and I didn't know the answer to that at the time for myself, but started to help my community in that way. When I started getting pretty burnt out on that, another opportunity popped up at the Association for Experiential Education. They were hiring for a new director of their accreditation program, and it felt like the obvious next step for me. Interviewed hard, got a corduroy blazer, and
Ooh,
like really tried to do it up, and I got the job. I was
I
really
think it was all about the blazer. It had
I'm
to
pretty
be.
sure
Yeah.
it was the blazer. In fact, some of the feedback I got was it seemed like I took the interview process more seriously. And I mean, that's just code word for nice blazer, I'm
Yeah,
pretty sure.
of course. Yeah.
So got that job, and that was what really kind of opened up my brain to all the different facets of experiential education and where I fit into that puzzle at the moment and where I could go. And I got to as the accreditation director, I got to open the books, among most of the reputable programs in the United States and even a few beyond of how are they running their outdoor programs. And that was an amazing education piece. I also was then in a position to manage the accreditation council, which was just full of my personal heroes and legends in the outdoor education industry that all of a sudden were looking to me for some kind of guidance. And I told them straight up, just like, hey, you all probably know a lot more than I do about this stuff. And I do know a thing or two about creating structure and, kind of
Right.
organizing people. And I think that's a service I can provide here. And it worked out really well for a few years until the opportunity to expand my role at AEE and dive into more of the professional development and the conference, and eventually the interim executive director role gave me a whole lot of insight into that world of indoor
Yeah.
indoor work.
Yeah. And
Uh,
just associations, which are interesting animals anyhow. I mean,
yeah, it became quickly apparent to me that association management was not my passion in life, and had a really good run at AEE, still actively involved in the organization. Fifth Pillar is a sponsor of their upcoming 50th international conference. So hold that place really near and dear to my heart. But when I left AEE, I had what I believed was like the last job I was ever going to need. I was stepping into an executive director position with a wilderness therapy organization. Uh, my pay went up substantially. I was going to be like traveling and jet setting, and I was ready to enter this phase of my career. At the same time, I had this nagging feeling that I was just moving further and further away from the magic of experiential education and facilitation. But I accepted that. I was just like, I'm going to move away from the magic, but I'm going to have stability and money, and it's going to be great. Um, and long story short, 3 months later, that program shut its doors and moved to another state, and I was left without a job. And it
mm,
was like a devastating moment in my personal and professional life. I'm like, I'm kind of the breadwinner in my family, and all of a sudden there was just no bread. And I started driving for Grubhub. Like I started doing whatever kind of gigs that I could get my hands on. I got in touch with some folks that were doing ropes course work and outdoor leadership stuff, and I was like, "Hey, I'm available. If you need somebody to do anything, you call me up." And started getting a fair amount of that kind of work. And it was really interesting because while my finances were not in the best shape at that moment, my heart and my soul were just like full. I was working with young people and college people and older people doing ropes course, doing outdoor work. I even led a backpacking trip for the first time in several years, and I was just beaming.
I can totally relate. So I was doing consulting and coaching independently, and then had the opportunity to go into do leadership and organizational development in a large corporate university. And I thought, okay, I'm going to go in there, get corporate experience, and bring it back out to the consulting. And I forgot that was my thinking going in there. And about 9 years in, they decided they were going to restructure, and I could have stayed. And it was that corporate gig, steady, a little bit of travel, about once a month, begun doing workshops, and it was really cool. But then they restructure, and they said you can stay here if you want to teach people how to climb ladders. And but it's demoralizing when something you think and is set gets taken away. But in that moment, I was reminded of why I went there in the first place. And I went through that despair. And by the time they were actually going to tell me that I was let go, I had processed that. So I sat in that room with the people ready for me, for the anger and the sadness to come out. I was like, no, thank you. This is where I need to be. stepped out, had no clue, again, that whole breadwinner thing. But a month or so into that, my wife looked at me and said, John, you're where you're supposed to be. I've never seen you this happy in the past 10 years.
Yeah.
And that was just, so again, we're not going to fall off the face of the earth. All's good. Things are going to work out. Might get tough, but you don't really know what's happening until there's the image from the New Testament in the Christian Bible where, Jesus is walking on the water. And the best part of that story isn't Jesus walking on the water. It's Peter who's in the boat and says, hey, tell me to come out and I will. And Jesus said, come on. And that guy, the rest were cowering in a boat. Peter steps out in the water and takes a few steps on the water. That is living juicy. He fell in, but he was the only one in that boat who fell into the embrace of Jesus. And that's so encouraging, because when you step out, when you find yourself in that situation of something taken away, if you can take a breath and realize that, man, that's what life is about. It's putting you back where you're supposed to be. And you connected back with yourself. And so when I hear you tell that story, even though I know the terrible feeling it is when something gets ripped away like that, it's probably because I was holding on too tight that I got the rope burn.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, it was such a profound moment in my life. Everything else had always kind of seemed relatively easy. My career trajectory it was really obvious. One thing led to the next, led to the next, led to the next. And I was so used to that when I lost that position, and I did, in addition to finding all the freelance gigs I could find, I was applying for real jobs and I wasn't getting them. And that was also a first for me. And, eventually I was like, what is the universe trying to tell me right now? And the answer was follow the joy, follow the signs, do what you love. You don't have to move away from the magic in order to make it work. And I believed without a doubt, and I would have even I would have counseled and coached other people. You don't need to start a business. There's plenty of people out there with great missions and visions, and you can just attach yourself to them, and you don't have to worry about, managing budgets and all the stuff that comes along with being the person in charge. I would have preached that from the top of the mountain. And today, I tell everybody to start a business.
So tell me this, and this gets to where
every once in a while.
I want to hear about it, because it seems like this is a pretty huge transition for you.
Yeah.
This idea of well, first of all, just moving out of that stability and into something new, but also the start of Fifth Pillar and how that, tell me about that transition, both occupation wise, but also mindset wise.
Sure. So I think it was August of 2019 that I got laid off. And so immediately started doing all the side gigs. And as that became a little bit more steady, I thought, all right, I'm going to keep looking for a job, but perhaps I should kind of be intentional about what's happening right now and funnel this work into a business. And so it was November of 2019 when I actually paid. For me in North Carolina, I basically had to fill out a 1-pager on the internet and pay $125, and poof, I was a business. And then just started thinking, well, if I'm a business, then I probably need some kind of mission, and some kind of description of what it is that I do. So, Fifth Pillar Consulting was born. The name is partly just a love note to Outward Bound. Oh, thanks. Yeah, there's the website. A love note to Outward Bound, and a lot of what I taught at Outward Bound revolved around the 4 pillars of Outward Bound, which were craftsmanship, physical fitness, self-reliance, and above all, compassion. And I was like, well, I'm not at Outward Bound anymore, so I'm going to be the 5th pillar, and I'm going to take that stuff and I'm going to spread it around the world. As that's evolved a little bit as well, I feel like a lot of what I teach and train kind of moves towards being ready when something doesn't go as you planned. And if a lot of times people think of 4 pillars as a strong foundation for some kind of roof or some kind of structure, my question is, well, what are you going to do if one of those pillars should fail? And I think generally folks that spend some time working with me in whatever capacity that I do, when they get done, they feel like, you know what? If one of those pillars fails, or even two of those pillars fails, like I have what I need inside me to take care of it. And so, in that sense, kind of, we can all become the fifth pillar and be ready for whatever comes our way.
Is there a
So,
connection between that sentiment and the fifth pillar and the magic? Because it seems like the magic is all about being ready for the unexpected and noticing it. Is there a
noticing,
connection there?
I think we just made one. Yeah. I mean, I don't talk a lot about the magic on my webpage.
Right.
No, I don't want to scare people away, but my life is an exercise in paying attention to what is in front of me and to the side of me and
Yeah.
behind me, and then moving with my intuition towards
Yeah.
what's next. And if
So
I can
you,
help other people do that, that probably means they're not being led by fear, and they're being led by love, and they're going towards what they want, and that is probably my primary function in this world as an educator.
so you might be like being present and kind as you go about doing great things. That kind of.
That sounds like something I've heard someone else say. Hmm.
So tell me a little bit more about like, so this transition, you decided, well, you were saying before you used to preach how you just hitch your wagon to another's mission. And now it's like, now you can't not tell people to start their own business. How did that transition come about?
Uh, because of the joy, the sheer amount of joy that I experience every day now in my work. Whereas, the other places I worked for were great places, and I experienced a lot of joy, but I also experienced a lot of frustration, and sometimes just being caught inside a system that I wished I could change, but I really did not have the ability to change parts of that system that I saw as necessary. Now, like, I get invited to come to places specifically because there's a part of the system that they would like to change or build upon, and it usually relates to my passion in life. So if that's creating community, or improving communication, or again, just ramping up the kindness and the compassion in an organizational culture, the relationships, like all that stuff brings me joy, and that's pretty much all I do. Um, and so the reason I would tell other people to at least consider it is I had been side gigging for a number of years. Like every once in a while, I would pick up a contract, facilitation work, team building work, whatever, and I would go and I'd do it, and I'd make a little bit of extra money, and I'd be like, that was cool. And I wish if I could go back and do it all over again, I would have started my business the first time I ever found a side gig. And I would have just said, okay, my side gig, my business is occasionally doing some facilitation work for other people. And that just opens up a new way of looking at things, that I would encourage everybody to do, even at the same time as having a stable, regular kind of 9 to 5 job. Just changes the way you look at your hobbies, your passions, your interest. Is how can I funnel some resources and some intention into those parts of myself so that I might be able to do them more, because they bring me joy, and they probably bring somebody else joy, as well, or they provide a service or fill a need. And so it's just a way of rethinking, like, what I might be doing for fun on the side could actually be sustainable and self-sustaining at the same time if I just shift the way I'm looking at it. It's like, oh, this isn't just a hobby. This is my side gig. And when I'm doing that, I'm following this particular mission. I'm exhibiting these particular values, and I'm doing work that's important to me. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't be doing it. And if you focus on it that way, you might be surprised by how that side gig builds and
Mm.
becomes a primary gig, and then other things become your side gig that are
Yeah.
less important to you.
It reminds me of a certain story that you inspired me to start to write about a raccoon named Peter,
Yeah.
whose side gig was pottery. And that, I mean, that's the story, is so much of people who they I don't want to like guilt people who are 9 to 5ers into starting their own business, because there's some people who aren't built for that, and that's perfect for them.
Mm-hmm.
There's other people who like get bored easily and have to have these side gigs. Sometimes turning your side gig or your hobby into a business is the worst thing that you can do, because all of a sudden that becomes a task rather than a joy. So like, I love the fact that it's, hey, if you have that mindset, if you want to shift that mindset to turn something you love into a side gig, that's great. And what you'll probably find is that that can be sustainable. When I was working on college campuses, students would come up to me and say, so John, what are you going to, or what's your dream? What's your goal? I'm still trying to figure that out, even though I'm in a master's program. And it's like, I would tell them, and I got in trouble with the career counselors for doing this. I would say, if you want to know what you want to do, figure out what you love to do and then convince somebody to pay you to do it. And the harder part is figuring out what you love to do. But once you do, that passion will show through. Like what I think you're experiencing, you're having amazing success because you clarified exactly what your proximity to the magic was supposed to be. And now you don't have a hard time at all convincing people to pay you to do what you love.
Oh, it just makes sense for me to be right there where it's happening.
Yeah.
I can manage stuff from far away. I think a lot of people are really capable of that. But it is just so obvious. If you put me in a room of people that are interested in learning and growing, like that's a match made in heaven. And especially if they're also interested in having some fun along the way.
Yeah. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about if you had to break it into maybe even percentages or whatever of the consulting, the coaching, and the facilitation,
Mm-hmm.
I know that all those bring you joy, but where do you think you find yourself the most? I mean, when you step into any of those contexts, where is it that you feel like you belong the most?
No, it's facilitation and training. I probably spend about 70% of my time just, in the place with the people who are trying to learn. Sometimes that's virtual. Lately, a lot of times that's in person. And that there's a lot of things I appreciate about that. It's a place to improvise. It's a place to kind of learn together. It's a place to build community. Um,
Yeah.
and, I will I'm not ashamed to use words like love and magic in the work that I do. And specifically like cohort based, like, hey, we're going to get together on a regular basis and seek personal and professional growth. There is love and community that is nurtured in that process, and people need that in their lives, especially these days.
Yeah.
And so it's like there's all these little side benefits to facilitation and training. You get to create more compassion in the world. You get to help people build bonds with each other that extend way beyond the training that you're doing. So I really love that. It's a lot of fun for me. And then consulting is probably 15%, usually related to outdoor education programs. Coaching is probably about 5%. It's not at all even what I set out to do. I just find that it keeps coming to me.
Right.
But it's not my primary business.
So going a little bit different direction, I'm wondering if you could grab your hand pan. Is that handy?
Yes.
Okay, go get it, please.
Okay.
So, one of the things that Dan has intentionally been integrating and always been a part of, from what I understand of who he is music. And I have this thing when I was doing live programs, even if I'm doing virtual programs, if you walk into a room without music, it's like walking into a room without furniture. And it's been fun to include Dan on some of the virtual facilitation because he'll grab an instrument like this when there was time or there was nothing really kind of side conversations going on, he'd pull out the handpan and do something like this.
Let's see. I'll give you a little space.
Thank you, my friend.
Yeah, buddy.
So tell me, like, what do you think music's role in your world is, or in facilitation and learning and growth? What role does music play?
Well, I think music is a metaphor for a lot of things, um, and that music kind of contributes to some level of opening. I know, and maybe it's true for many. I know it's true for me that hearing music puts me in a different mental space than being in a quiet room or engaging in, whatever small talk with folks. It just kind of music is made up of like someone's creativity expressed in somewhat unique ways, right? No two pieces of music sound exactly the same. Um, and so you're just kind of inviting creativity into the air that you breathe and the space that's around you. Uh, and then I also find it's a powerful metaphor because a lot of people um, have some level of music inside them, right? Whether they just love to listen to it, maybe they like to dance, maybe they just tap their feet and they don't even notice. Um, but there's also some fear associated with that for a lot of folks. Like, oh, you ask somebody to sing in public, and that just like opens up some people's biggest fears. Uh, but then you're playing a game of Simon Says, and you Simon Says harmonize to this note. And for some reason, this has been an interesting exploration for me lately, is when you're playing a game of Simon Says, people seem to be more inclined to do just about anything than when you're just like, hey, everybody, let's harmonize to this note. And so anyway, maybe you're playing a game of Simon Says, let's harmonize to this, ooh. And then all of a sudden you have a room full of people who are just going, ooh. And it creates a harmony. And it's shows how much the sum of our parts is greater than the whole. No, the whole is greater than the sum of our parts, and that we can create music or just about anything together. And the fact that we're creating it together makes it more powerful than anything we might ever do on our own. And so
Uh,
you'll find me when I'm working with music and a crowd, it's not generally just like, hey everybody, look at me, I'm playing music. I like to make things up about whatever's happening in the room. I like to invite participation. I generally don't do requests. I just have fun with it and invite people to have fun with me. Once you start getting that vibe in a group of people, like, oh, this is a safe place for us to have fun, for us to try new things, that actually leads to a lot of potential in terms of what are we here to learn? What are we here to do?
Yeah, it's interesting. I need to explore this thought a little bit more, but as you know, I don't know what I think until I say it out loud.
Hmm.
Um, the concept of harmonics, where you get two notes that resonate together to create a bigger sound. I
Hmm.
mean, that I need to explore that thought a little bit and in a metaphor for what we're trying to do a lot of the times when we're trying to connect people. And the power of that connection is when you take a bunch of different notes that are uh that harmonize or create those dynamics, and it's much bigger.
Yeah, you can take that a step further too. It's actually just talking about this with a group of public school or independent school teachers in Texas. Is Yeah, so the obvious ones, like if you know anything about music, basic chords are kind of the one, three, and the five,
Hmm.
and those are always going to sound nice together. And that's good to know, and that's right about just what you said. The things that we create are bigger, but then you start throwing in the ones that are less obvious. You add in a sixth here, or a minor seventh here, or you get weird and do like the diminished add 9 plus 13 kind of stuff. And that's where you start adding sounds into a chord that don't necessarily, like, they're not obvious and they don't always work, but they can. And they provide a kind of nuance. It's like it's how you make jazz. And so sometimes when I'm working with a group and I'm like, hey, this is good. We're doing the big obvious stuff. Now what are the little hits, the little, nuances we can put in here that makes it just even that much smoother? or that much more, aligned with our mission and our vision. Like, how do we make jazz together? It's a little less obvious, but it's just as magical.
So a couple of things come up. One is Paul Simon's it's Malcolm Gladwell's book, audio book on Paul Simon.
Right, Miracle and Wonder.
Yeah, Miracle and Wonder. One of the chapters, they're describing how they came across it's still crazy after all these years. And it starts with a Bach canon, and he moves it seamlessly into a jazz chord that leads him into blues.
Of course.
And it's that kind of thing. The other thing it goes to, and this is a really left field one, which is because I had to go through a bunch of quarters of physics in my undergrad, wave theory, resonance and dissonance. And the whole idea is that when dissonance happens, basically the waves flatten out when they're out of sync. The waves flatten out and the wave disappears. But resonance is when the waves line up and it increases the amplitude. And so when you're talking about music, that's what's happening. Resonance happen when these chords work together, when you get the harmonies. It's all about that resonance that happens. And then, as I think of this in terms of facilitation, it's being intentional about moving resonance and dissonance back and forth, because dissonance is just as important, and figuring out how to resonate in the midst of dissonance. So just a quick geek out on the physics, and I know you thought there would be no physics today. I apologize.
We can talk about this all day, man. It's it is very much a metaphor for what we do. We create experiences, and some parts of those experiences are like, oh yeah, this is great, everything's harmonious. And then some parts of those experiences are also like, this is uncomfortable, I don't know what to do, and something still happens. And like, both of those parts are so important. You listen to great compositions, and sometimes they'll resolve, or that phrase will end in a way that's like, that's just the chord that I needed to happen at the end of that phrase to make me feel good. And sometimes they just won't. Sometimes they'll leave you in a place where you're just hanging, and you're just like, what are you doing, music? How can you leave me hanging right there? But there's a reason that they leave you hanging right there. And that is such a metaphor for what we do as facilitators and trainers.
And probably one of the most, when you're training facilitators, oftentimes facilitators that are new to the business or whatever are, number one, they're trying to recreate the experience they had when they did that particular activity, and they're stealing away the learning by resolving. And so success for an activity is when they accomplish the goal and everybody's happy and hugging each other and all that kind of stuff. But that's not always what success looks like. I'm curious, when you're working with younger facilitators, or there's people maybe watching this that want to think about getting into facilitation or consulting or coaching, what is you like? What don't they get? What are some of the biggest misunderstandings about what facilitation is, or the greatest hurdles as people are developing as facilitators?
Sure. Well, just to continue with the music metaphor, I think the thing that takes the most time to develop is comfort with improvisation. I know, even when I was first instructing wilderness courses, like, I would make such a detailed plan of at least the first 4 days. Of literally every second was accounted for on my plan. There was a flow of how time is going to go and what we're going to be doing and when. And that just felt really good. It's like, okay, I have this, and now I'm going into this expedition. And then every time things happened that would cause that 4-day plan to get essentially thrown out the window. And I became more and more comfortable with that over time, to eventually it was just like making the 4-day plan was the important part of the process. And then I would just throw it out the window on the way to the expedition, because I knew that was all worthless now. Students are going to show up and we're going to engage in an experience together. So to kind of pull out the metaphor there is I think new facilitators get a little too attached to the schedule and to what they think is going to happen. And it makes it harder to pivot and improvise on the spot when you kind of uncover what needs to happen, or what's going to happen whether you like it or not. So you better be ready, because it's hard to predict what humans are going to do in just about any situation.
Yeah. In one of the, like, probably at least the last 10 years, if not longer, top 5 leadership competencies, always in the top 5 is comfort with ambiguity.
Yeah, yeah, we live in a VUCA world,
Yeah.
but he hasn't heard that one before, right? And the skill for leaders today is like, how do we deal with not knowing? And
Yeah.
that's a tough one, because for many, I think a lot of our history, the image of the leader is just unflappable, unwavering, knows, that steel resolve. We are going this way. This is what's happening. And now it's what we're looking for in leaders is like a little bit of role modeling of what do we do when we don't know what to do.
Right. The illusion of control. That's
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, just another topic. What were some of your key lessons through the pandemic? Because you entered in this huge transition just as the pandemic hit.
Yeah,
So
that's the funny part of that story, right? So
yeah,
I started the business in October of 2019. And just as I started to get some traction and I had some clients and I was like, this is working, then pandemic comes and everything cancels, right? And our business is often like getting large groups of people uncomfortably close together. And so we were a little concerned that perhaps our whole industry was about to implode. Uh, so early on, there was a lesson in letting go of like I could have been very frustrated, right? I like finally made it out of this hole only to find myself now in a deeper hole. That what made it okay was people like you. Like all of a sudden we were in this deeper hole together. So previously I was kind of by myself in this deep hole, been laid off, trying to figure stuff out. I had some support for sure, but not everybody was in that same boat. In March of 2020, all of a sudden everybody who were in my circles was right there with me. And I was like, well, welcome to the party, people. We are struggling and now it's time to figure out what to do next. And so the lesson on just like how to help yourself by helping other people, I guess, is what really came out of that time for me. If you remember, because I had had some experience with virtual facilitation during my time at AEE, and all my work went away, and I was literally just like hanging out. I'd been working from home for a long time, so that wasn't too new for me, but I had no work to do. I started offering free coaching for anybody that was a facilitator trying to figure out how to do it virtually. And people started taking me up on that. And so, I offered probably in those first few months, like upwards of 100 or 150 coaching sessions where I asked for nothing in return. I just had time. I was, thinking of something my friend Doc Klein had told me that he got from Peter Block of the value of making your gifts visible and useful. And I think at that moment is when I finally understood it. And so I was like, I have some gifts. I don't have to get paid for them. I'm just going to make my gifts visible and useful because everybody's struggling right now. And through that offering of coaching and just being helpful to people, like I think that led to all the success that I ended up having, because one, people often feel the need to reciprocate when you do nice things for them. And so they would connect me with potential clients or invite me to help produce or do technical work on a virtual gig that they were doing. And that led to one thing and that led to another thing. And these days I have more work than I know what to do with. But I really do think it all came from that initial realization of what can I do right now so that my gifts are visible and useful? Because otherwise, like, I'm just hanging out by myself and I'm not helping. And when I started really doing that, regardless of whether I was being paid for it, that was like the final piece. And now, whenever I find myself with time, or one of the things I really like about being my own business is I can be of service to anybody that I want to be of service to. I don't have anybody telling me I can't say yes unless they pay me this amount. And I love that kind of flexibility. So I can make my gifts visible and useful to anybody and everybody. And if you're a corporation with a big budget, it might cost you a different amount than if you're a public school that's just trying to make it through another year.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely your gifts have been visible and useful for me. So I appreciate that over the last little bit.
Right
Um,
back at you, John.
so all right, quick hitter here. Favorite book to give as a gift? What I know you've got a couple of them,
Yep.
but I'm curious, like when you like if you just want to give somebody something that's meaningful, what do you give them?
Well, I'm gonna open before I show it to you. I'm gonna open this book to a random page, and
Okay.
I'm gonna see what it says on that page and read it to you. Um, doing nothing with friends is never doing nothing, is it? Asked the boy. No, said the mole. So I turned to one page of this book, which is called "The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse." This book was given to me by my friend Bob Kodzis from Flight of Ideas down in Florida.
Mhm.
And it just showed up on my door. I didn't really have a lot of, warning about what was happening. I got this book and I read it and I shed a few tears. And it was at the early stage of all this starting my business. And it was just this book, reading this book, or even a part of this book is just like getting a warm, long hug from a friend.
Mm.
It's a story about a boy talking to these animals, having a little bit of adventure, but every line in the book is a nugget of wisdom that can be applied to life, and that just it feels good to read it, it feels good to say it out loud, and it feels wonderful to share with other people. So I've sent out probably a dozen copies of this book or more to friends. Sometimes I'll put something on social media that's like, hey, first 5 people to respond get this book because I want more of it in the world.
Yeah. Okay. And I
One
know
more
this.
time. The
Oh,
boy, the mole, the
yeah.
fox, and the horse. Get it, read it, share it. It's beautiful.
Okay. So this is it. This that's the one, right?
That's the one.
Okay.
Beautiful, beautiful pictures too, and the whole thing is written like it was written, with a pen or a marker. Nothing is
All
typed.
right. Calligraphy.
Hmm.
Cool. All right. Another one. I know this one's going to be a tough one for you. Who, like, when you look for inspiration, when you look for like heroes or leaders that you look up to, give me your top two or three. And again, you're not signing a contract that this is what it is for the rest of your life. It's just right now, first comes to mind, who are some of your heroes when it comes to growing people?
Mm. Um, so one of the first one that comes to mind is Daniel Goleman, and he's the guy that wrote about emotional intelligence and kind of founded that model. Uh, John, you and I read this book, Primal Leadership, in our kind of book club. And while I had read Emotional Intelligence many, many years ago, that book, Primal Leadership, kind of opened up a door to me that just, it again connected like, okay, we're doing training and development for leaders and for corporations and some of these like high level folks. The connection between how to be a good leader uh, and how to be a good human being, I think is just made really obvious in the emotional intelligence model. And the bonus is that everybody can learn it. Emotional intelligence is different than IQ, and that it's not something that's relatively fixed. It's a skill set that anybody can learn. And if you really focus on increasing your emotional intelligence, you are able to be of service, more in your community. And you can balance things in your life, I think, a little bit better. So I really loved that book and all the work that Daniel Goleman has done in just packaging what it is to be socially intelligent and not just book smart.
Well, he intentionally, like, there is the EQ model that is just like it's an analog to IQ. But what he intentionally did was say, let's look at the stuff that we can do something about. So we'll focus on competencies rather than attributes. And that was really, I think, brilliant intention on his part with primal leadership and then just the whole model.
Yeah, all of us have the capacity to be amazing, inspirational leaders or inspirational followers or whatever our role that we want to, carve out for ourselves. Like we all have it. We all have it in us, and this book specifically, I think, gives some really clear kind of roadmap of how to get there.
Yeah.
And I use it, concepts from emotional intelligence in every single training that I create or help deliver.
Yeah.
So Daniel Goleman's a big one. My own daughter is got to be on the list. She is such a hero to me in um, her her honesty and her zest for life. So, I don't know if I ever really aged much past my late teens. I know, some of the hair got a little grayer, but like I don't know how much I've really changed besides I've learned a few things since then. And so she brings me back to my core of just, following what is fascinating to you and unconditional love and kindness and making anything fun are probably the greatest gifts that I get from her.
Yeah. So wrapping things up here, I want to turn the tables a little bit, and I'm going to invite you to ask me 3 questions. And I do this partially because it's just fun, but also you can gauge we've talked about questions before in coaching and facilitating and stuff. And oftentimes you can read a lot about or get a lot about people from the questions they ask. So to me, this is just as an important part of the interview with you as anything else that we've done. But you get the opportunity, and I'm talking so that you have a chance to formulate. 3 questions that you would ask of me. I promise a response, but not always an answer.
I think, one, I know we both have a child about the same age, and I'm curious, after having said what I just said, about what I've learned from Quinn, my 8.5-year-old daughter. What have you learned from Pax?
I think part of the same way is that the surprise and wonder on new things. And Pax has a very expressive face, so what he's thinking whenever it happens. And just that surprise and wonder. The other thing is that being an only child, I'm so impressed at how he occupies himself. I can count on one hand how many times he's come up to me and said, "Daddy, I'm bored." And usually he says he's bored when he's trying to avoid homework. But his ability to spend hours occupying himself, it amazes me. And that goes back to, there's no such thing as being bored, but being boring people. And that mindset or that outlook on life where everything is a possibility to be engaged with. And it goes back to thoughts about creativity, and that we don't, there's no such thing as a non-creative person. We are all born creative. We unlearn it usually through the school system. And so helping people get back in touch with that. Every day I wake up to somebody who, whether it's even the creativity of following Lego instructions. He can take apart, like just yesterday, he took apart this big old helicopter Lego set, and it was just as intriguing to him as he put it back together, even though he's done that 4 or 5 times. So that's that for me. What I learned from Pax is that the reminding of the beginner's mindset and the wonder that surrounds us, that we forget to look for.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Yeah, if we can see through the eyes of a child, the world is beautiful and fascinating and amazing. And that's especially important when we sometimes get a little jaded or cynical, which I don't know. I'll only speak for myself that the specter of that creeps up on me every once in a while.
Yeah.
How about something that you once believed to be true? And this one, maybe related to work or not, but something that you once believed to be true that you no longer believe is true.
I think this is one that goes in and out for me. So it's the concept of gratitude and giving. Sometimes I forget how important it is. And I think, through the pandemic, you reminded me that often give it away, give it. It's okay to give. And I think when I get stressed or concerned about being the breadwinner, or when things get tight financially, I forget that. And it's one of those things where there's often times where, whether consciously or unconscious, I believe that scarcity is true. And I have to be reminded, I have to choose that each morning to remember that no, it's abundance is true. And the scarcity mindset reinforces itself. If you don't think you have enough, you won't. But when you have an abundant mindset, when the idea of live abundant and a little bit messy, that's where the whole living life juicy things comes from, is that I need to get up, remind myself, number one, start with gratitude. That changes your mindset when you step into anything, and it pushes you towards thinking through abundance. So I think the thing that goes back and forth, and that I once believed to be true and will probably fall into it again, is that reality is scarcity, or scarcity is reality. And I know that I'll slip back into that if I don't consciously choose that on a daily basis, to be grateful.
Nice. When I hear you saying that, I feel like we could replace the word scarcity with fear, and we could replace the word abundance with love, and the metaphor is pretty much the same. That if we remember to kind of be led by what we love and knowing that we are loved, as opposed to what we're afraid of, that we can go so much farther.
Yeah. Okay, one more question, and then we'll wrap it up.
One more question for you. What's next? What's next for John Losey?
It's a great question.
Uh-huh.
I like to think that I plan things. In fact, I'm a believer that make plans and then hold on to them loosely. My hope is what next is kind of to do what I was planning to do before the pandemic, which was to become kind of organizations outsourced learning or organizational university type of thing, where if you are an organization that you do technical training, maybe you have vendors come in and do stuff, but if you would like to have a learning organization within your business that truly fits you and your business, and isn't just a bunch of vendors that are thrown together, that I want to come in and help you create that. Into Wisdom, I've got great collaborators, like people like Dan and some other people who I can bring in as strategic partners who help create great learning experiences. And we can be your outsourced corporate university until you're ready and have the capacity to do it yourself, and then we hand the keys over. And sometimes that's just a matter of putting together an onboarding orientation program that we help run, and then we hand the keys over when you're ready to take it over yourself. Or maybe it's just combining all the vendors and the training that you created yourself into a place that's easy to access and usable. So that's kind of where I'm hoping next short term is to get back on that track, which was totally interrupted by the pandemic. So I'm excited about that possibility, and that's where I want to put some of my energy. I'm also still excited about helping people figure out. It's sad to me that people are black and white about virtual and in person.
Yeah.
And they're not applying the lessons that they learned over the past 2 years to create really, really healthy workplaces. It's not a great resignation. It's a great reshuffle. If you're just looking at it as a resignation, you're just looking at yourself. You're not looking at the workforce that's out there. So figuring out, and it's not a blanket, like here's a one fix for everybody. It's really understanding your organization and your systems to create a place that is both effective and where workers can be content. And that's part of that is figuring out how you're going to handle your in-person versus virtual, and your synchronous and asynchronous, and just creating that almost like a graphic equalizer for your organization and how you're going to manage those things. Right. So I'm excited about the AEE conference that's coming up that we're working on. You're going to get a chance to do your music, but we're also working on hybrid and virtual things that I think we're going to break some models about how effective you can really be in that weird context of virtual and hybrid. So I'm excited about figuring that out. So those are a couple of things that are next.
That's exciting, man. Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think that things are ever kind of going back to the way they were, now that people have experienced what's possible with remote and virtual engagements. And while some people are just like sick of them and they want to keep playing the game of black and white, of it's either this or that, I think those of us, that are gonna be a part of this new revolution understand there's a whole lot of space in the middle, and that's where you can have a
Yeah.
lot of fun and make things appropriate for your situation.
Yeah, it's a scary, it seems like it's really complicated, and it is. But if you fear that complication, you'll never go through it to find the elegant solutions that are on the other side. And that's what I'm excited about, helping people figure out those elegant, simple solutions that are on the other side of the complexity that'll really kind of revolutionize and rejuvenate their organizations so that people really want to be there. So the other side of it is helping individuals figure out how to re-enter. And that's a lot. It's not about time management or energy management. It's about self-management that Goldman talks about a lot. And figuring out, how do I manage myself in this new work context rather than play, oh, it's not working for me, I'm not happy here. Well, part of it's the workplace, and part of it is your ability to manage yourself. So that equation in there too, figuring out how to do that. So
It's a good skill to have.
it kind of crucial. So Dan, thank you so much for spending this time. I know we talk at least, usually weekly, and we could continue to talk for a long, long time. But I know anybody who's lasted this long, thank you so much. If you last this long, then you might as well just subscribe to the Living Life Juicy YouTube channel or make a comment, whatever. But man, this was definitely an example of somebody. Dan, you are being present and kind and doing great things as you do that. So thank you for sharing so much. And with that, let's wrap things up. So
Thanks, John. It's my pleasure.
thank you, Dan.
Get more out of life every day. Picture biting into a whole peeled orange. Not a tin bite, but a huge wide mouth bite. What if you lived your life like that? Living Life Juicy is what that life might be like. We explore how we can be present and kind as we do great things.